Welcome to Powerlunchlive. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's good to be with you here. I cannot believe we're in April already, but anyway, we are mid-April, almost May. Anyway, it's good to be back with you on Tuesday. What is it, the 20th? Or what day are we?
420. Yeah, it is 420 right. Indeed.
Goodness. Well, today it's a real pleasure to have Keziah Robinson on. We're going to talk about business strategy, coaching. We're going to talk about her work, but it's good to have you with us. That's the reason why we're here. The whole point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing work in the world that we can learn from and get better at what we do. That's the whole point. Now, the show is interactive, so if you get on that computer monitor or type keyboard, yeah, that's what it is, and type your question, we'd appreciate that so that we can help you, get better. Now, we broadcast this not only on LinkedIn Live, but Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and so we monitor those during the program. So if you have a question, please ask. We're happy to try to get the answer that you want. Now, Keziah is a CFA. She's also a business strategist, CEO, coach, and an investor. She's been described by her clients as a shapeshifter. So I want to ask her about that. Who can coach any business through any challenge at any stage in the business. She's got a BS in physics from Stanford University and an MBA from Wharton. She serves on the advisory board of Private Packs, which is an innovator in the fast-growing femtech industry. And she's currently working on a new book, but we'll get into all of that. Keziah, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Rhett.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And your work is something I've been wanting to explore and talk to you about for a while. Mm-hmm. You work with a lot of small, medium enterprises, and you talk about this helicopter parenting of your business, and I'm fascinated by that. As a father of two teenage boys, I've heard the term helicopter parenting, but how does that relate to your business? And talk a little bit about that.
Well, if we think sort of classically, something like helicopter parenting is driving to your kid at college and doing their laundry for them, right? Or writing their college essays, which are meant to be, as opposed to maybe reading them to proofread or something like that. So helicopter parenting has to do with that kind of inability to let the kid, or in this case, your business, grow and lead itself. And it's a really fascinating thing. And you see a lot with founders, but even with sometimes when people who've taken over a smaller business or a medium-sized business, because they've put their blood, sweat, and tears into it, right? And they often started and I'll see it a ton in sales. Sales is a classic example where someone is, the CEO will still be doing most of the sales calls. Sometimes it's technical. Sometimes I've had them where it's the numbers, the CEO is still doing bookkeeping. And what happens is you essentially, not only are you doing something that's not the highest and best use of your time as a leader, but you stifle the business and you prevent it from being able to grow. And just like kids, you go, well, if I don't do his laundry, he's going to put the red socks in with the whites. It's like, okay, well, sometimes that happens. Maybe pink is the color of the year and your kid is now really, really cool. So sometimes that'll happen. It's like, oh, well, they might go off script on the sales call. It's like, yeah, but they might actually come up with something that's different and better. And if it isn't, they're going to have to learn and they're going to have to develop on their own and have some feedback there. So that's what helicopter parenting usually looks like.
I can tell you, when I started my toy company, and I think one of the biggest challenges for me was sort of that letting go, right? Where you have to, at some stage, in order to grow. I mean, we came to this sort of critical juncture, right, where we had to hire people and we had to put processes and systems in place to let them do their job, and that's tough. That's a tough thing to do, to let go of some of that control, some of that power, some of that, it's a tough thing. So I totally relate and understand. Is that, so in the things that you're seeing now, and I mean, and I want to get into this sort of COVID conversation, is that even tougher today with the clients that you're working with? And what are some of the challenges that they're facing now that you see as maybe you wouldn't have seen a year or 2 years ago?
I definitely think that people who have gone through the crisis have, some of the people on their team didn't handle it well, right? I have clients though who didn't handle it well either. And a lot of the work I do with people is I do a lot of behavioral assessments and work with people from strengths. And one of the things is there's some people who can roll with the punches and there's some people who can't. And you can always build that capacity. But there definitely were people who freaked out, right, in the early stages. And so with the helicopter parenting of the business, what can happen is, it's sort of like the first time your kid stumbles and cuts their knee or something. You can't wrap them in bubble wrap, right? You can't, they have to learn to walk on their own. And there is that element where it's like, oh, well, I had maybe one of your team members panicked, and I had one with a client where one of his team members, his wife had a autoimmune disorder and he was just like afraid to leave his house, right? And it was very stressful and very anxiety producing, and he wasn't doing his work. And he's actually one of the top producers now, right? Having a fantastic year. So I think that there's something to be said for if you try to constrict too much when you hit a crisis, you don't really give your team the ability to learn to cope and rely on themselves and rely on the other members of the team. So that's something I definitely saw a lot of. Also, though, and I'm sure you saw this, you mentioned it with the toy businesses, one of the things about growing a business is you have to know as the leader what you're growing into, because you're always growing out of the job you used to have. Sometimes people say you're going to fire yourself. I'm like, no, let's not put it in those terms, right? We're not trying to fire ourselves. We're just trying to grow into the next level of leadership. And that's something that on the flip side, I did have a lot of clients who came in and they're like, this isn't the life I want. This isn't the business I want. I want to take it up a notch. I have a client who's in his 60s. He's trying to sell his business and he's like, he actually want to go up market. So we're doing that. Right. And he could have sold, he could have stayed where he was. That would have been more conservative. But when you're looking at life and you go, is this the life I'm going to lead? Is this the business I'm going to leave? Is this where I want my name and my legacy to be? If the answer is no. So I also had a lot of leaders come in who were really open to things they'd been hiding inside of themselves.
Yeah. And it seems to me like the pandemic, if it did one major thing, was it gave us that chance to sort of totally reset, right? It gave us that permission that we've been, I don't know, to me, a lot of people I worked with said, this is the first time I felt like I had the freedom to sort of blow everything up and completely make huge changes, and this was the time to do it, right? I haven't been happy about where we are, what we're doing, or how we're doing it for a long time, but I was afraid to make those big changes until now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen that?
Absolutely. I mean, I had a client who came in at the beginning and she was in a restaurant related business, and she had completely retooled and come up with an entirely new business model. And I think that ultimately, for someone like that, who's sort of a natural entrepreneur, you can get trapped. You get a business, it's going well, and you can really hit a limit and limit yourself when you haven't had the chance to really take your creative energy, because you've got clients, you've got a business, you've got employees, right? So there is something about having this tear down, this sort of pivot that you're forced into, that actually is something that, and I'll work with people sometimes on, is how do you create sort of that experience without having a pandemic, right? So how do you maybe bring that into the business and say, all right, we're going to consider a pivot in here without having a crisis first, because usually that's what happens, right? I think that's a lot of the work that I do with people too, is like, okay, well, what would it look like? How do you build that out? Then how do you look at the team you have and decide whether or not they're going to be able to make that change. Because sometimes it's time for you to sell this business and start something new. And sometimes it's this time to take the business you're in and shift it. It's always really kind of.
What you think? I had a guest on a few months ago, and we were talking about this as sort of the golden age of being able to find, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you want to grow, and this is a great time to buy and to look around for companies to buy. Are you seeing? I know that's a little bit outside of what you do, but are you seeing a lot of companies ready to do something different? Entrepreneurs ready to do something
I see a lot of sellers out there. So definitely, I think a lot of businesses, and I don't broker businesses, but I absolutely work with people to get a business ready for prime time. Because what I see a lot is in my clientele are businesses where they are starting to think about selling, and there's nothing in place. There's no infrastructure in place. And so I think on the flip side, there are buyers out there, but those buyers have to be really consider what are you buying, and are you buying something that's in good shape? And I had a couple of people come in, and they had bought a chain of daycare centers, and I was like, oh, well, tell me about that. They didn't have an early childhood background. They were wonderful people who cared a lot about children and families, but it was like, tell me about that. And one of them looked at me and goes, well, I kind of thought it would be a good investment. Seemed like it would be a good, passive income investment. And I was like, okay. So there are a lot of people out there, I think, who this is a time to really get someone like you or me to really get professionals involved, because it's very exciting to buy a business, but there is no passive income, right? You either worked to build the asset that will then, so you and then you have to maintain it, or, you're going to be running this business. And I think that's something that's really key. But there's a lot of businesses that are out there, especially service businesses. So it's definitely a time, if you want to buy, to really do your research and get out there and really see what's available.
Well, we bought a little one product toy company, and I remember we went in and we literally had a 636 page business plan. And
I'm sorry.
This was enough. I mean, it was like War and Peace, really. It was, but that did not survive the first week. So.
Right. That's like the art of war, right? Like no battle plan survives first engagement with the enemy. It's like
exactly. Yeah. But it would have been nice. I look back on that time and think, well, where was Keziah at the time? Because it would have been great to have, somebody to help just sort of sort us out. Because we. But so what is the value in having a coach or having an advisor that can kind of help you see the things through your blind spots and around the corners that you don't see? What's the value in that?
Well, I think you just pointed out one of them, right? Is to bring perspective from outside, and especially for someone like me, and I think more for you, I'm not industry specific, so I have an enormous industry breadth from my previous careers in consulting and investing. But one of the things is that I think it can be really important to have someone come in who's like, well, why is that true? To just question these assumptions you make. Well, you can't find good employees in construction. People don't show up. Why is that true? And to go through restaurants, same thing. A lot of times, well, customers won't pay for X. It's like, well, let's assume that so you got the wrong customer. Do you want a different customer, or do you want a different product? So a lot of what I think with coaching is to just have someone who's really not, I'm team client, right? I'm invested in the client, but I am not invested in your particular product line. I'm not invested in your marketing strategy. Like, none of those things matter to me. I'm really on the team of the CEO, who's the client, and on the business, right? Because the business is my client too. So I see that a lot. And one of the things, and you know, from coaching and versus consulting, say, is a consultant gives you answers, right? You come to a consultant or an advisor, you say, you know, hey, my product market fit is a prime example. That's the number one cause of failure in most businesses, right? So my product, I have an issue here. And an advisor or consultant will go run some numbers, come back to you, work through it and go, okay, well, the market's really good. The product's not so great. So let's stick with one or another, right? As a coach, I'm here to help you understand which one matters more to you. Because if you really love your product, it does not matter that you're not going to abandon it, right? That's not going to work. So what you need is support on how to find another market for it. And it doesn't matter that that's not the right answer, because that's what you're going to do. And we all know if you aren't pursuing what really matters to you, you're just going to sabotage the other efforts. So that's something that when I think about coaching is also really helping people. What kind of leader do you want to be? Okay, do you want to be like a papa bear or a mama bear and have like the team all snuggled up with you? Or do you want to be somebody who gets spotlight and who's out there and is really an advocate for the business? Do you want to have an organization that's more sales focused? Do you want to have a team that's more internally relationship focused? You have all these choices, and I can't tell you which one is the right one. That's really the advantage to coaching, is having someone who's on your side, but who's going to really help you grow into yourself in addition to growing into the role.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think you're spot on. And it's a question I get all the time, and so I'm always fascinated how other people.
Well, plus the money always works. I mean, that's what we also go and say, all right, wait, you know, like I mean, I had a client last week, and he said, you know, thank you so much. We were talking about something and clearing up an issue that he had with a person on his team, and he goes, you just made my whole week a lot easier. And I was like, exactly. So now you could actually get that new product launch done, right? Like, okay. So I've had people come in. I need to hire more people. That's common. I mean, I had someone, she wanted to hire more people. We did a little bit of work. Very quickly, she ended up letting 2 people go and swung into profitability for a startup business. So the money always comes through too. So I sometimes shy away from leading with that because there's no promises, but it always seems to work itself out.
Yeah. I totally get that a lot, but you can't lead with that.
Right. Well, if you did, then you would be asked. Then the price, right? Sometimes I'm like, yeah, if you want me to actually lead with case studies of how much more money you'll make, like you need to like be prepared to write me a lot larger check than you're thinking. Right. So,
wrong conversation, because you can prove that ROI pretty quickly. Pretty regularly, right? I mean, on a pretty consistent basis.
Exactly.
What is you talk a lot about 3D modeling, delete, delegate, and do. What do you mean?
So, and I stole that. I just want to be fair. I did steal it from somebody else. So I know it's not trained for a reason.
We endorse taking good stuff from
I took a poetry writing class once, and that was something the teacher said. She said, steal everything. And it's very true in poetry and rap and things like that. And it's an interesting, and I'm like, yeah, steal anything that's not tied down. Try to give attribution, but feel free. So delete, delegate, do. That model comes from every client I've ever had comes in and they're doing too much, not getting enough done. That's the story of high achieving people, and it's the story of low achieving people, right? Doing too much, not getting enough done. So one of the earlier tactical pieces we do is we take a look at what's on the tasks. What are your tasks and responsibilities? And start to really go through and begin to prune. And the first phase is like, what does not need to be done? And that's where over-engineering, right? A lot of times on the product side, people are over-engineering. They over-engineer customer experience. Like, you don't have to write a handwritten note to every customer, right? So we'll do customer profitability, segmentation, things like that in that phase, and really just get you to start to throw things out. The delegate is, as we talked about, the helicopter parenting the business. That's sort of the next phase. And that's really understanding what should be done by someone else, either because often they're better at it than you are, like finance, most of the stuff people should outsource, or if you have someone on the team who can handle it, there's no reason you should be doing your own books. Someone else is better at that. Or sometimes, it's just a comparative advantage, right? It's just not a good use of your time. And again, it doesn't need to be done. I always say, what's the acceptable error rate with delegation? I had a client once who had a digital marketing business, and she was worried about not being able to check all of the posts that were going out for all of the clients. And it's like, okay, well, what's the acceptable error rate? Like, what's the criteria? So we set what criteria were, then she could train to it, then she could measure it, then she could finally go on vacation and not be worried. Right. So that's sort of some of the stuff, the process stuff in the delegation. And then do is really thinking about what is at your pay grade. And I feel like a lot of times people are so afraid of letting go of doing the actual work, like what they think of as the actual work. And I'm like, you're not above it. It's not abandoning your roots to not be on all these sales calls, right? Or not be swinging the hammer yourself, right? You're not above it, but it's below your pay grade. And that thinking of it, what does a CEO do, right, of a business of this size? What does a CEO do of the next size up of a business? What are the things that you're responsible for, and what decisions should be made at your level versus what decisions should be made at the lower level? So it tends to loop. What happens is you get through and then they go, actually, there's a whole bunch of more stuff we should just delete. And all this stuff I thought I had to do, I'm going to delegate. And you start to really refine the process until they have a pretty good understanding of their job, the job description, plus what they need from the rest of the team in order to be able to do their job. So that's the 3D model.
I love this point you talk about here, because I just remember this so sort of vividly in my mind. The first couple of years of this business, we had a product that we made in the warehouse and that we drove and delivered to places. It's a really hard product to ship. It was it was sort of a nightmare product. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first year or 2 years, we were making the product ourselves, delivering our product ourselves. And we were just sort of stuck in this hamster wheel of not being able to grow. And it was really the getting off the out of the truck and out of the delivery van and sitting at my desk is where when both my co-founder and I got out of the truck, we were able to focus on growth and focus on what we really should be focused on. That's when we grew. And we grew 1,300% a year for a couple of years. Wow. It was ridiculous. Right. But I wish I'd have done that sooner. I wish I'd have been able to say, have somebody say, look, right now it might be painful, but it might be worth hiring somebody to go do that.
Well, sometimes I always tell people, for
you to think.
Exactly. And I always tell people, I did 40 years in the desert, so you only have to do 10 or 20, but we all have to make some mistakes, right? We can't bubble wrap ourselves. And one of them can be worrying a lot about like immediate cash flow versus thinking of money as investment. So I'm like, there are no expenses, there's only investment. So a driver is an investment. And at which point you start to think about investment and you can begin to look at, okay, how much could we grow? How much more money will be down the line? You also start to look at, okay, let's not cheap out on this investment. Right. Because that's a lot of the concern is like, well, I'm going to get somebody and they're not going to take care of the product and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I had a client and she says, well, I had a virtual assistant. She was talking about this. And I was like, how much were you paying this virtual assistant? She goes, $7 an hour. They were overseas. I said, what would happen if you had to pay? I pay my virtual assistant $50 an hour. Guess what? Everything gets done. So there's a lot to be said for really focusing on the investment that you're making at each. And when you start to value your time and you go, wait a second, is this the investment? If this is my time is worth X, is this where I want to invest that money? Or do I want to invest It's always going to be a lower number, right? In someone else
Mm-hmm.
who's really qualified to do it, and then trust myself to do the job. So I mean, prime example. But you got to try. You have to learn some things for yourself.
I think I learned. I think I learned a lot. I mean, I learned what the customer wanted. I learned what the pain points were. I learned what the objections were. So, I mean, I don't mean to sound like I hated that. I learned,
right.
I mean, a tremendous amount.
And then you did it for another year after you should have stopped usually, right? That's the way.
Right.
So,
great point. That's I was going to say maybe,
exactly.
maybe even a little longer than that. But anyway, so you talk about having your cake and eat it too. Have fun, do good, make money. Why is that your sort of mantra, you think?
Well, I think we're addicted to work, and we're addicted not just to work, but addicted to effort. It's very, we can say it's American, it's Western, it's whatever, but you think of the things we tell ourselves, like no pain, no gain. That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, why would you sign up for that? So there's a lot.
My coaches all through college and high school were wrong, weren't they?
Right. Well, I think that, again, if you start looking at it, instead of treating it as an expense, you say it's an investment. The same thing is true for anything. Like it's not pain, right? It's a choice to invest your physical and mental and emotional energy in things. And what you're looking for is the highest return on that investment. You know, you think of like the first time, if you're out of shape, you decide you're going to run a mile. Like that first mile is brutal, right? But you get more efficient at it over time, and that allows you to run faster and run further. If you got up and tried to run a marathon, and every mile of that marathon, even after you've been training, was the same amount of effort that first mile when you were out of shape was, what a waste. And yet we'll do that. We'll handicap ourselves into these habits of, let's say, not putting in training. Like the number of times, I don't have time to do that. It's like, I mean, I will go with people, I'll be like, how many hours do you think it's going to be to sit down with the team and do we'll map it out. I was like, okay, so how many hours have we spent even in our coaching talking about this issue, right? Like, right. I know how much I charge. I know how much, that 3 hours that you're going to spread over 2 meetings is going to save you a year of your life, basically. So there's a lot that goes in to this idea that we have, that we can't have fun, you can't make money, you can't do good. Absolutely, you can do all those things. And if you come at it from a perspective that we can do all those things, you start to see other solutions.
Okay, like what? Yeah, you have an example?
I mean, a big one is people often say, they'll come to me there's a point, especially with founders, when they want to start a nonprofit. And this is a point usually when it's more of an emotional crisis. They're actually starting to get ready to really make a lot of money, and there's some anxiety about that. And am I a bad person if I'm going to make money? Right? And one of the things that I work with people on is like, how do you create value? Right? So if you are not creating value for other people, they're not going to pay you. But you can take that beyond and say, well, how do I create value, not just for my customer, but for the community? And what are the elements to that? So it doesn't require you to start a nonprofit. You don't even need to become a B Corp, right? If you're just mindful of like, how am I creating value for the community? You'll do things like treat your employees better.
Right.
You'll have things like diversity, equity, inclusion, all of a sudden they make good business sense anyway. That's a separate conversation about why people think that have the wrong thought about it. But even then you say, hey, this is a great investment because your community is future customers, right? So the more you invest in the community, the more that people in the future will buy from you, the more money you can make. Selecting your clients, a big one, is to say, you don't have to serve everybody. So you can choose to provide superior service and target clients and customers who have a history of doing good in their community. So there's no reason that you can't make money as you're going along with all of this. And in fact, I think if we look at, look at the Gates Foundation, like billions and billions and billions of dollars are a great way to do good. And you get billions and billions and billions of dollars because of the productivity miracle, right, in the 90s. So that's
Right.
which was all about business.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, not that every client wants to have $1 billion, but if that's where if you're trying to create good, accumulating wealth is a great way actually to do good as well.
Well, and to not, I like your point about not feeling bad about that.
Yeah.
And not feeling bad that you're successful, not feeling bad that that's a goal. I don't see anything wrong with having a goal being financial independence and financial security. I mean, that I don't know why people feel guilty about that, but they do. You're actually right. People feel guilty about it.
We feel guilty sometimes, and I live in New England, right? That's where I'm from originally, but I used to live in Los Angeles. So which is an interesting cultural distinction, but there is a lot of this. People, are afraid to stand out. They're afraid to be better, get too big for their britches, to be better than other people. And I think that, we rise together. So your success does not in any way limit someone else's success. In fact, you're more likely the people around you will rise with you. So some of it is to kind of have that, and that's the mindset work that in coaching, we also do all this. I call it woo-woo. I'm like, I'm mostly business, but I definitely do the woo-woo. And a lot of that stuff is about people and ultimately being able to be all of the pieces of themselves and to integrate all those pieces of themselves, including if you want to be a star, being a star, or you want to be somebody who's, Mr. Moneybags, and you just really want to have a lot of wealth for whatever reason, because you want to buy a Maserati, Grand, whatever. I can't remember the fancy one from them, but like, you want to do that, that's fine. Those pieces can all integrate with you being a good person, with you being someone who takes care of your community and your employees and your customers.
Why are we scared or hesitant to promote ourselves, you think?
So, I mean, we'll get a little into the social theory and stuff, but there's two kind of competing, there's sort of three main things that we need, right? Security, physical, mental, emotional security, belonging, and we have that drive for independence and the desire to stand out, autonomy. And what happens is that we, especially the belonging and the autonomy, begin to get in competition with each other. So we want to stand out, but we want to be loved and accepted. And when you stand out, you begin to, number one, risk your security, right? Somebody's not going to like you. Somebody's going to put a bad comment on it, right? Nobody gets 100%. There's no 100% net promoter score. Right? So we begin to, and especially when we're afraid that group we belong to, like our family, right? Or if we live cultural, whatever, might be the ones who are going to start giving us negative comments. So those things can be in conflict. And what you're looking for is, how do you balance them? And some of that's choosing new groups to belong to, right? Choosing groups of people who are all about success and about celebrating that. Some of that is having to, like the imposter syndrome part, and just saying, you know what, I've got to stand on my own 2 feet, and it's okay. It's the acceptable error rate. Okay, some percentage of people are not going to like me.
Right.
What is the acceptable error rate for me in terms of negative feedback that I can take at this level, at the next level, at the next level? So that's kind of how I think about it when I'm dealing with myself and with clients.
And it's it's a necessary thing today, I think. I mean, you talked a little bit about standing out, and I think in this world that we're operating business in and trying to navigate, particularly for small and medium enterprises, it's a necessary thing today, I think. And it's a new part of the reality. I know, 10 or 15 years ago, I didn't really give much thought to my own brand and to my own promotion. I thought more about it in the context of the business. But I think today it's essential for the CEO, president, the founder to be out there and talking about what's important in terms of that business. So, and trying to share their thought leadership on why, about the industry. So that I agree with you. I always find that a fascinating question, and I want to ask people what they think about that. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. We are about out of time, but how can people find you, and if they want to work with you, find out more about your work, how can they get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn. I am probably not the only Keziah Robinson, but one of the few. So I know people can see my name, and also feel free to reach out to me through my website. That's Keziah Partners. So it's www.cassia-partners.com. And I just love learning about people's businesses. So I'm kind of a nerd at heart. So I'm always interested in just learning more about so feel free to reach out to me about kind of anything, because I will definitely enjoy picking through your business and just, I always learn something.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's nice to have you on today. You can find out the schedule of upcoming shows at powerlunch.live on our website. We've got a great lineup this week. Tomorrow, we've got Megan Lynch. Thursday, I've got David Comless. So it's going to be an interesting week. And until tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern, we'll see you then. Have a great day. Thanks, Keziah.
Thanks.